Meet the most popular killer. Because of this little guy, about 100 million people died in the 20th century. This is tobacco. Its leaves still have nicotine, a poison that shields it from pests. If an insect tries it, it dies immediately, but a person can spend years heading toward their death. Tobacco originated in America. The history of the colonization of this continent has some horrific pages. The colonists gave blankets infected with smallpox to the indigenous people, and in doing so, they caused a deadly epidemic. In return, Europe received its own deadly gift, an epidemic of nicotine addiction. To this day, humanity is searching for a safe way to consume this poison, nicotine. They drank it, smoked it, inhaled it, used it with vapor, heated it, but the result was always the same: illness or death. In this film, I will try to answer together with you the questions. Who got humanity hooked on cigarettes? Why do teenagers die after taking just one puff of a vape? And is there a safe way to use nicotine? Let's try to figure this out and dive together into this story of deception. Or maybe it's a story of self-deception. The first European who encountered tobacco was Christopher Columbus. In 1492, he discovered America and received a bundle of dried tobacco leaves as a gift from the natives, but he threw them overboard. Europeans at the time didn't know what kind of plant it was, or its purpose. Was it simply a broom? But the very first smoker in Europe was Rodrigo de Jerez. He arrived on the shores of America together with Columbus. Rodrigo ended up being more curious. He watched the Indians who smoked tobacco leaves and picked up this harmful habit from them, for which, by the way, he later paid the price. When he returned to Spain, Jerez continued to smoke in public. However, the sight of a person blowing clouds of smoke from his mouth was shocking at that time. He was considered possessed, arrested, and imprisoned for 7 years. The irony is that when Rodrigo was released, smoking had already become a popular habit in Europe, and people smoked a lot. Tobacco came to Russia in the mid-16th century. The Orthodox Church, like the Roman Catholic Church, considered smoking a demonic activity. And in 1634, Tsar Mikhail Fyodorovich officially banned the use of tobacco. The decree stated that neither Russians nor any foreigners were to keep tobacco, nor smoke it, nor trade in tobacco. At that time, tobacco infusions were popular, and it really could be drunk. Violators of the Tsar's decree were punished severely. They were flogged, had their nostrils torn out, and were exiled. Sometimes they were even executed coronoi. Pyotr I was responsible for changing attitudes toward tobacco in the Russian Tsardom. During his travels in Europe, he himself became addicted to the pipe. He saw smoking as a sign of some kind of European enlightenment and wanted to introduce all of this to our ordinary people. In 1697, he officially lifted the ban on tobacco. The first tobacco factories began to appear, and by the end of the 19th century, Russia had become one of the largest consumers of tobacco in the world. Smoking became a routine part of life for all segments of the population. What do we have now? According to the Ministry of Health and Rosstat, the share of smokers in Russia is 20%. Every fifth person among us smokes. It's worth noting a positive trend. Over the past 7 years, the number of smokers in our country has decreased by 5%. The history of tobacco consumption in the old world began with self-deception, which ultimately cost the lives of hundreds of millions of people. At first, tobacco was not seen as a poison, but as a medicine, as a sedative. And the first European to claim that tobacco was a medicine was the Portuguese explorer Pedro Cabral. In 1500, he arrived in what is now Brazil, and he described how the local people used the leaves of this marvelous plant to treat abscesses and ulcers. 60 years later, the French diplomat Jean Nicot presented a fateful gift to the French Queen Catherine de' Medici, a box of snuff and some seeds. This gift was positioned as a remedy for migraines. And by the way, the Queen's son suffered from it. That's how the fashion for treating illnesses with tobacco appeared in Europe. Later, in honor of Nico, the plant received its scientific name, Nicotiana, and the alkaloid extracted from its leaves was called nicotine. Almost 30 years later, a book was published in the Netherlands. It was called The Vegetable Panacea, and it was about the medicinal properties of tobacco. It described tobacco as a universal remedy. Yes, it's funny to hear that today. And they thought it was capable of curing a very wide range of diseases, from migraines and colds to the plague and ulcers. After the book was published, tobacco was officially prescribed as medicine and sold in pharmacies across Europe. Can you imagine that? And tobacco was taken as snuff, used as tinctures, decoctions, ointments, and there were even tobacco inhalations, just a little bit. Later, tobacco enemas also became popular, and with the help of a special tube, tobacco smoke was introduced into the rectum. Doctors then thought tobacco smoke warmed internal organs and stimulated the respiratory and cardiovascular systems. And in 1746, there was even a documented case where a tobacco enema helped bring a drowned woman back to life. Can you believe how absurd that is here?
The rectum, it's also in the large intestine. There are blood vessels there too. That was a long time ago. The task was simple. If I felt bad, you would inject something there, just introduce some kind of solution directly into the rectum. It could instantly improve your mood. So does this affect any disease? The answer is, of course, no.
In 1761, the English doctor John Hill was the first to link tobacco to the development of cancer. He noticed that some people who abused tobacco died more often from mysterious illnesses. In his book, A Warning Against the Immoderate Use of Snuff, Hill described in detail cases where the harmful habit led to the development of tumors, such as in the nasopharynx or oral cavity. But this caused no public reaction, and attitudes toward tobacco did not change at all. And what about now? Is it any different? And only 70 years later, German chemists isolated pure nicotine from tobacco leaves. This made it possible to further study the effects of nicotine on our bodies. And thanks to this discovery, humanity was finally able to realize that nicotine causes a strong physical and psychological dependence.
Addiction is severe. Smokers constantly manage withdrawal. Nicotine leaves the body in about 2 hours, then withdrawal starts again. If you don't smoke, your body becomes unbalanced. Basically, acetylcholine doesn't work, so you urgently need to add some nicotine to your brain. In terms of consequences, nicotine comes first, then alcohol. No other drug even comes close. We have 1 billion people addicted to nicotine, a bit fewer to alcohol, and in terms of consequences, it's still nicotine. Ischemic heart disease, heart attacks, strokes, lung cancer, 20 to 1. So out of 20 smokers, 1, and even then it's either from gunfire, explosions, or asbestos. We know some harmful factors, but the rest just got it from smoking.
Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, yes. The well-known smoker's disease is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It comes in different forms. Emphysematous, like emphysema, or as obstructive bronchitis, and sometimes it can be bronchial asthma. That's not the point. Lung cancer can also happen because of carcinogens and, again, prolonged smoking. There's a possibility of myocardial infarction, strokes, and arrhythmias later on. So what causes this? Because the blood vessels are damaged. The blood vessels of the heart are damaged, as well as the blood vessels of the lower limbs. Atherosclerosis damages arteries in the lower limbs. These are usually always smokers with a long history. In their case, they didn't get cancer there or live long enough to develop cancer from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, but they almost always have atherosclerosis too. Here are 2 fatal issues. What will kill him? It's unclear, right?
Even the smallest child knows that smoking causes cancer, and all the pictures on cigarette packs constantly remind us of this. But few people have thought about how this happens. Some systems in our body require constant renewal. For example, the skin, the cells in the gastrointestinal tract and in the respiratory tract are also constantly renewing. And by the way, so is the genitourinary system. Its DNA keeps doubling and doubling, meaning it keeps dividing, and it's during this DNA duplication that damage can occur. And the cell mutates, and this mutated, altered cell becomes cancerous. There are substances that cause mutations in cells. We scientists call them carcinogens. By the way, nutritionists and doctors often talk about their harmful effects. There are a huge number of reels about carcinogens, and it is carcinogens that increase the likelihood of tumor cell development. That's why every day I go to work, see these patients, and try to help them. And all of them once started their path to our hospital bed with some harmful, destructive habit. Some people get sick without smoking or drinking, but statistics still show smokers are at higher risk. Because most of my patients are people who smoke, even though I'm a urologist. And do you think smoking is only about the lungs? No, smoking is not just about the lungs. Paradoxically, nicotine itself is not a carcinogen, meaning it doesn't induce the appearance of cancer cells, but it creates very favorable conditions for the development of cancer. Nicotine is a procarcinogen. It stimulates cells and helps them divide faster, prevents them from dying on time, which increases their risk of turning into malignant tumors. And by the way, it suppresses the immune system. And it's the immune system that acts as a cleaner and removes all the bad cells from the body. It reduces its ability to recognize and destroy cancer cells in a timely manner.
Nicotine is not a pure carcinogen. It's more of a conductor, let's say, yes, for that. It creates conditions for oncological processes to develop, for example, yes, cancer, in general for cancer to develop. This is related to its effect on blood vessels and the immune system. The immune system becomes weaker, the permeability of blood vessels increases, and conditions for chronic inflammation arise due to oxygen deprivation.
When nicotine enters the bloodstream, it is processed in the liver, and under the action of liver enzymes, 3 highly carcinogenic substances are formed. I won't torture you with this right now. I'll just write their names somewhere around me here. So here's an interesting fact. These substances are exactly what cause mutations and contribute to the malignant transformation of cells. And they also stimulate the growth of tumors in the lungs, esophagus, pancreas, and bladder. As a urologist, I confirm this again. During tobacco combustion, over 5,000 chemicals form, with more than 70 recognized as carcinogens and mutagens. At the same time, according to some observations, modern cigarettes are more mutagenic than those that were produced earlier, because cigarette composition has changed significantly. Additives are added to make them easier to smoke so you don't cough as much, and additives are added that make them burn faster. In the past, the number of cigarettes smoked by smokers was much lower. Every day, several million of these abnormal cells appear in a healthy person's body, and that's normal. But the body knows how to deal with them. Smoking delivers a double blow. On one hand, it suppresses the immune system, and on the other, it promotes the formation of cancer cells. Answer me a simple question. Why do we know that smoking causes cancer? We don't quit smoking because
cancer is something that happens to someone else. So they don't see the correlation. They live in self-deception. I'll enjoy myself for an hour and then I'll suffer now when I quit. Will cancer come or not? But this story probably isn't about me. Then those with stage 4 cancer cry a lot, but by then there's no turning back. Withdrawal is the hardest part, but I always say to focus on the positives. Your receptors have cleared, food tastes different, and the smoker's cough is gone. You don't cough or spit out filth in the mornings. You get sick less, breathe better. Small steps. It's hard. Here's the nicotine receptor blocker for you to make withdrawal easier.
Well, do something. By the end of the 19th century, cigarettes became available to everyone. The American inventor Jameson Bonsack created an automatic cigarette machine that could roll up to 200 cigarettes per minute. Previously, all were hand-rolled, making the process much more labor-intensive. And before that, cigarettes were rolled in factories, just like cigars. The process was very similar. And that's why production volume increased sharply and the cost of production went down. They made more money from cigarettes, which became widely available, leading to increased smoking. Tobacco factories started getting rich very quickly. Monopolies and very large market players began to form. Small producers either went bankrupt or were simply bought out. But what do you do after destroying or absorbing all your competitors? You need to find a way to develop further, right? And the monopolists threw all their power and money into the fight for new smokers, and those smokers turned out to be women. Journalist Edward Bernays played a key role in attracting women to smoking. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud himself. Yes, that very same Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. And he was the first to realize that his uncle's idea about subconscious desires and hidden instincts could be used to sell products. It's important to note that in the past, women smoking in America was strongly discouraged and considered unacceptable. It was believed that a woman simply shouldn't and couldn't smoke. The law even prohibited women from smoking in public places. In 1929, Edward Bernays came up with a promotional campaign for the tobacco company Lucky Strike, and it forever changed the attitude toward women smoking. The campaign took place during the annual Easter parade, and it was covered by absolutely all American publications. A crowd of women came out onto Fifth Avenue, and they demonstratively smoked cigarettes. And among them, by the way, there were a huge number of beautiful Vogue magazine models. The event was called the Torch of Freedom, and supposedly it was a fight for women's rights, but in reality, it was all paid for by a tobacco company. It was a real torch march, a cultural revolution. He didn't even have to make arrangements with journalists to cover the event. As soon as the journalists saw the girls with SEVP ERT cigarettes, they rushed to take pictures, and the next day, the striking photos were featured in various sections of American publications, including The Times. Just 5 weeks after the campaign, which was very well thought out and organized, Bernays' smoking rooms were opened in New York. And the following year, the law that prohibited women from smoking in public places was abolished. The attitude toward women smoking, this negative image, it changed forever, and it became an essential, you could say, attribute of women's emancipation. And the number of female smokers skyrocketed. Bernays continued to work with the Lucky Strike company. It was he who came up with the idea of romanticizing the image of a smoker in cinema. Bernays was able to convince producers and directors that cigarettes, the very act of smoking, and even blowing smoke were very convenient and expressive tools for actors. Thanks to his initiative, the act of smoking began to be shown frequently in films. The 1930s and 1940s became the golden age of on-screen smoking. People smoked in almost every film, regardless of genre, from silent movies with Chaplin to westerns and noir. If you look closely at American classics, you can notice that almost everyone is smoking, and the rooms are very smoky. Back then, smoking wasn't considered dangerous. Tobacco companies presented smoking as a symbol of success, freedom, and sexuality, and Hollywood managed to create the image of the cool smoker. Men smoked in a tough way, women smoked seductively. They could do tricks with their hands, and some female smokers even made history in cinema. For example, Marlene Dietrich in a men's suit with a cigarette, or for instance, Audrey Byrne with men's accessories. These images are already classics of world cinema, and the archetype of the sexy female smoker still lives on in modern films. One of the most striking images of a smoking seductress was the heroine. Remember who crossed her legs in that iconic scene? Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct.
Understand how this influence works. It's considered a demonstration of the wrist, all these sexual signs of sexual readiness in women. Yes, it's played up very well in Hollywood. They even described how a woman should smoke, the nervous one, the seductive one, the worried ones. It wasn't exactly written into the script. Everything is very well done. There will be a video with the person who wrote the script for Basic Instinct. He himself is a smoker, he obviously has throat cancer, and he can't speak properly anymore. And he really regrets that they used to sit down separately with tobacco companies and work out how to sell smoking through sexuality. He took a lot of money for it, but he got what he deserved in the end. Sharon Stone. Accordingly, infertility, she smoked non-stop and there were a bunch of pregnancies, but she didn't carry any of them to term. Michael Douglas also had some very serious problems due to smoking, and he had to quit because of it. We can trace all these smokers' life stories, including Sharon, who barely survived a blood clot, a severe stroke. They saved her also from heavy smoking.
There was never such smoking propaganda in the Soviet Union. During the Great Patriotic War, tobacco was included in rations for soldiers, and collective farms were required to supply tobacco and makorka to the front. In the post-war period, the Soviet Union very quickly became one of the world leaders in tobacco production. Let's be honest, what kind of anti-tobacco measures can we talk about when we're talking about the period when the country was led by Stalin? There are many photos, some of which we'll likely add here, showing him with a pipe. That was the most powerful thing at that time, I think, and it wasn't even propaganda. And Churchill, by the way, too. He always had a cigar. And only in 1977 did the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union issue a decree in which they finally officially recognized that smoking is a bad habit, and numerous state and public organizations were supposed to fight against smoking. And it says that it's harmful, but there were no restrictive measures. There weren't any. There was propaganda for a healthy lifestyle, morning exercises, campaign posters against alcohol. Do you remember that poster? And against smoking as well. But there was no systematic anti-tobacco legislation in the country. It just didn't exist. In the end, SER took third place in the world in the production of papirosas and cigarettes. At the same time, by the way, the tobacco industry was a significant source of income for the state budget. It really reminds me of bees fighting against honey. Soviet cinema, like Hollywood, featured a lot of smoking without disclaimers. Let's recall the image of Faina Ranevskaya in the role of I. As a cabaret performer, she played the piano, smoked, and at the same time somehow managed to sing. There is also the archetype of the cool smoker in Soviet cinema. Remember Gleb Zheglov, played by Vladimir Vysotsky, Sterlitz by Vyacheslav Tikhonov, and my favorite, Sherlock Holmes, by Vasily Livanov. Back then, people joked that there was no sex in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, but women in Soviet cinema also smoked seductively, imitating American temptresses. For example, Svetliknaya in The Diamond Arm, how she seduced. Remember Nikulin. Of course, you could blame it on the era, saying that everyone smoked back then, without exception. But by the middle of the 20th century, there was already plenty of scientific data confirming the enormous harm smoking does to health. In 1952, one of the most popular magazines in the United States, I think you've heard of it, Reader's Digest. It published an article called Cancer by Smoking. This publication caused real panic among millions of American smokers, and the heads of the largest tobacco companies met and developed a plan to protect the reputation of nicotine. One of the main points of this strategy was to sponsor research claiming that nicotine is not that harmful. And they started funding such studies to create a scientific debate around smoking so that scientists would say that things are not so clear-cut. That's how the tobacco lobby appeared. Later, a frank statement to smokers under this name was published in newspapers. And it stated that the industry was acting with the best intentions, that they would never release a product that could even by 1% lead to harming their health. Funny, right? In 1954, British scientists Richard Dole and Austin Bradford Hill scientifically proved for the first time the link between smoking and lung cancer. This study caused a wide response both among the general public and in the scientific community. Tobacco companies panicked, but giving up. They were not going to, fearing a market collapse. The manufacturers urgently began searching for a safe solution, one that would reassure consumers. The solution was a filter. That same year, the company British American Tobacco released canned cigarettes with a filter, and they started advertising it as the biggest breakthrough in the history of smoking. The advertising campaign focused on health protection, although the effectiveness of such filters was highly questionable. The next year, for the first time, filtered cigarette sales in the United States exceeded unfiltered cigarette sales in the Union. The first filtered cigarettes appeared only in 1966, and they were Java cigarettes. The appearance of filters was a response to global trends. We also kept an eye on them, and our doctors acknowledged the statements of medical professionals about the dangers of smoking, and filtration itself was seen as an improvement in cigarette quality.
The filter creates a certain resistance, and here's the cruel joke. You have to make more effort, meaning because of the resistance, you inhale more smoke, and as a result, the coverage area increases. And people who are not really familiar with the topic, analyzing smoking's harm, one might think a yellow filter means all the tar is trapped. It's purified smoke, so it's harmless. Well, unfortunately, they're mistaken because the filter, of course, can't block such tiny particles. Some of the larger ones will stay, but everything else will easily get through. Rest assured, overall, this doesn't lead to any improvement.
Today, it has been scientifically proven that filters do not make smoking safe. Initially, manufacturers claimed that filters reduce the amount of tar we inhale as well as other toxic substances. By the way, they also said that this prevents tobacco particles from getting into the lungs, but that's not true. Filtered cigarettes remain just as dangerous because of the resistance created by the filter. Smokers take deeper drags, which significantly increases the penetration of toxic components into the peripheral areas, the smallest parts of the lungs. Over the past 30 years, doctors have begun to notice a surge in cases of adenocarcinoma. This is a type of cancer, a glandular cancer that mainly occurs in the peripheral areas of the lungs. There was a report. It was a report by the Surgeon General in the United States. In 2014, he officially confirmed that changes in cigarette design, which began in the early 1950s, led to an increase in the incidence of this particular type of cancer. It's paradoxical. They tried to help, but made things worse. And this isn't a call to smoke unfiltered cigarettes. It's a call to understand that cigarettes haven't become any less dangerous. Arguments about whether smoking is harmful or not kept coming up because the tobacco lobby was always trying to dispute it. But in the end, the evidence became so undeniable that there was simply nowhere left to turn. And then two reports appeared at once that put an end to the debate. One report was from the British, the other from the Americans. In 1962 and 1964, the reports were called Smoking and Health. All the I's were dotted and T's were crossed there, and they really alarmed the public because it was no longer possible for tobacco companies to argue with these reports. They had no response to these reports. 5 years later, a United States law banning tobacco ads on television takes effect, causing the tobacco industry to lose its main advertising channel. Cinema becomes the perfect replacement. Movies are watched by almost everyone. Little children, our grandmothers and grandfathers, and of course, all the young people. And most importantly, there are no restrictions there. In 1998, millions of documents from tobacco companies were declassified, confirming that there were systematic payments to film companies, including the largest ones, and to actors as well. Thus, it became known that just the company Braun and Williamson paid $950,000 for placing their cigarettes between 1979 and 1983 in more than 20 films, and they paid the studios. To producers, actors, for example, Sylvester Stallone, he received $500,000 from Braun and Williamson for using their products in his 5 films. How could that be, Sly? Soviet cinema didn't avoid hidden cigarette advertising either. Strangely enough, Marlboro was advertised in 1977 by the American tobacco company Philip Morris, which is still thriving today. They started selling their cigarettes in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and these cigarettes were already being produced at Soviet factories. All of this might have happened because 2 years earlier, there was a docking between the Soviet and American spacecraft Soyuz and Apollo. Soviet memory. They figured this out. It was decided to develop a cigarette brand. Just like in the space program, Soviet and American specialists were supposed to participate in this project, and an agreement was made with Philip Morris. That's how the well-known Soyuz Apollo brand came to be. And of course, production was first launched at the Moscow Java factory. And so, thanks to space achievements, Philip Morris appeared on the Soviet market. And Marlboro packs became frequent props in Soviet cinema. Ivan Vasilievich changed his profession. Do you remember that great childhood movie? Leonid Kuravlyov's character uses a pack of Marlboro cigarettes as a microphone during the song. Do you remember?
Yes, we're being encouraged to smoke and drink everywhere. It's hard to imagine. Some movies don't do this at all. Moscow and in to Moscow and to Moscow and to Moscow and Moscow and Moscow to Moscow and to Moscow to. Types of baby from in.
A. The union collapsed, supply disruptions of imported raw materials began, and as a result, most tobacco factories closed down. The total cigarette shortage reached 60 billion pieces, and a real epidemic of riots began in the cities. In Perm, for example, smokers blocked the street, stopped a tram, and went to the city executive committee. In Sverdlovsk and Moscow, for example, protesters blocked roads and started stopping transportation. In Leningrad, huge lines gathered on Nevsky Prospect, and people even lit bonfires. It smells kind of medieval. Can you imagine? All this is for a habit that takes years off your life. Back then, in the 90s, foreign tobacco companies flooded the Russian market, and along with them came new methods of promoting tobacco.
Back then, Dorenko said that a company came to him and offered him tens of thousands of dollars. Simply if he would say in his shows, well, smoking is of course harmful, but it creates jobs, it helps the economy, and so on. Just for one phrase, you don't even need to have anything on the table. These people are so calculating. The tobacco lobby is so powerful that nothing, including vapes, will be banned. In fact, there will be even more products. They'll talk about how harmful it is, how much they care about the kids, but they'll poison us twice as hard. Now,
the Russian market offers domestically produced cigarettes, but with a small caveat. Almost all tobacco factories are owned by foreign monopolists. Revenue from tobacco excise taxes in the country's budget is steadily increasing. If in 2023 the income from cigarette sales was just over 750 billion rubles, then next year, in 2026, it is already expected to exceed 1 trillion. Since the 2000s, the government has pursued an anti-tobacco policy, starting with banning tobacco sales to anyone under 18 and requiring identification. And by the way, they really did restrict advertising. They banned the sale of cigarettes in educational institutions, in medical and cultural institutions. They also banned smoking on airplanes. I remember a time when airplanes had ashtrays in the armrests. If you remember that too, let me know.
At the back of the LVM, the last seats were for smoking. Everything there was brown, the whole ceiling. People smoked right in the cabin. There were those ashtrays, they were yellow, just like a good filter. It smelled so bad there. It was fine, nothing special, but then they banned it and everything got better.
In 2010, by the way, the legislative fight against smoking continued. They banned tobacco advertising. Secondly, they raised excise taxes and started promoting a healthy lifestyle. Actually, that's what I'm doing, including through this episode. In 2013, the requirements for cigarette packaging design were tightened. Now, there are scary pictures on the pack, and they're supposed to scare the smoker, to remind him that it's very harmful. They introduced a complete ban on smoking in all public places. Previously, people smoked everywhere in restaurants. Now, smoking and even bringing cigarettes is banned in restaurants, cafes, and public transport. 100.
The harm is 100% clear. Let's just stop this nonsense. That's all the prevention there is. Everything else, like how harmful it is, movies about it. Let's draw impotence on the pack. Then he says, give me that pack with impotence on it, please. Otherwise, I'm like a zombie right now. I haven't smoked for 2 hours. I feel bad. All our drugs don't cause 100% addiction. Yes, they just have different degrees of addictive potential. Modern designer ones. Almost immediately, because the euphoria, the psychostimulant, and the empathogenic experiences are so strong that you get hooked instantly. With alcohol, addiction develops less often. There's a predisposition. A lot of factors play a role. Same with nicotine. If you endure just a little, the addiction is quite severe. The smoker is constantly managing their withdrawal period.
With the introduction of restrictions, hookah started to gain popularity. It's also called shisha abroad. In 1991, Russians were allowed to travel abroad freely. And we quickly took a liking to it. Remember, our most popular destinations were Turkey and Egypt. It was from there that we brought back this shisha, this hookah, and this harmful habit. The hookah craze peaked in the 2000s, and the industry is still constantly developing. There's a myth that hookah is safer than cigarettes because water purifies the smoke and it's milder and non-addictive, but that's false. During a 1-hour session, hookah enthusiasts take about 100 puffs while smoking a single cigarette involves 10 to 15. This means that in one session, a hookah smoker consumes as much nicotine as in 3 packs of cigarettes. In addition, hookah smoke contains a very high level of carbon monoxide. That means
hookah is simple. There are different types of cigarettes and hookahs. For example, hookahs have different types. For example, there are different types of hookahs and cigarettes. For example, different types of hookah cigarettes. To be continued. To be continued. To be continued
follows. To be continued. And vapes, their marketing. It was very aggressive, and it still is aggressive, and it's primarily targeted at our children, at young people. Recently, the World Health Organization assessed the spread of electronic cigarettes for the first time, and the results were alarming. More than 100 million people around the world already use electronic cigarettes and vapes at the same time. 15% are teens ages 13 to 15. Children are about 9 times more likely than adults to use vapes. The mass production of electronic cigarettes is associated with the Chinese pharmacist Hon Lik. In 2003, he was able to create the first commercially successful version of the device. By the way, here's an important point that not all of you know. His father was a heavy smoker. And what do you think he died from? From lung cancer. Hon Lik sought a less harmful alternative to smoking and wanted to help people. But, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. In fact, the first electronic cigarette was actually banned earlier, much earlier. This was in 1930, and it was invented by an American, Joseph Robinson. He even, by the way, got a patent for this device. And by the way, it resembled a modern vape. There was a heating element, a liquid tank with a mouthpiece. 30 years later, in 1963, American scientist Herbert Gilbert applied for a smokeless cigarette patent. His invention was the physical embodiment of the electronic cigarette, but it did not gain widespread popularity and failed to enter the market. Mass production and release of electronic cigarettes and vapes did not happen at that time, and the reason was this. Neither consumers nor investors trusted electronic cigarettes. It was very difficult to compete with the tobacco industry. The lobbying was very strong at that time, and absolutely no attention was paid to the device. And now, when tobacco use is actually declining thanks to awareness and anti-tobacco measures, remember, 30%, it's the perfect time to start spinning a new flywheel and launch a new product on the market, just like the filter back in the day, which made smoking safe. And this is a way to attract a new audience, namely teenagers. Those people who unfortunately start harmful habits much more easily, become addicted much faster, and have a greater desire to try something new. Statistics show that teens who start smoking are likely to smoke for life.
They're already slaves, like zombies going nowhere. Money comes from involving new people, exactly right, and alcohol and more. This is adolescence, when the cortex hasn't matured yet, the behavior control centers, when all the stable behavioral patterns are being formed. Everything is aimed at this generation. It's already clear with us. We've already figured out our own attitude.
So what makes vaping so attractive to teenagers? First of all, they're quite well informed about the dangers of smoking cigarettes, and vapes have been presented to them as a less harmful alternative. And phrases like no tar, just vapor, and an alternative way of consumption have managed to create a false impression among young people that vapes are harmless or less harmful. I've shared how I saw a mother at a conference call her school-aged son from a vape shop to ask which vape to buy for him. Which vape? Secondly, vaping has been turned into a whole aesthetic. TikTok and YouTube are full of videos where young people blow out huge clouds of vapor and do so-called vape tricks. And for a teenager, vaping is not associated with a bad habit or lung cancer like cigarettes, but with a cool hobby. Thirdly, compare the harsh, unpleasant smell of tobacco smoke with the aroma of mango, strawberry, bubblegum, or some kind of sweet lemonade that comes from a vape. Flavor additives hide the unpleasant sensations of smoking that might have deterred a smoker after their first regular cigarette. After all, not many of those who try cigarettes continue to smoke them. Coughing, feeling unwell, and nausea stop them. Things that don't happen with vaping, right? For Zoomers who grew up with iPhones and tablets, vaping seems like a logical extension of gadget culture. You can charge it, change the settings, refill it with different liquids, customize the design, and that's really appealing. It's very interactive and modern, unlike regular cigarettes. And the cherry on top, vapor doesn't have that harsh smell like tobacco smoke. And you can easily hide this bad habit from your parents. Your clothes don't smell, your fingers don't smell, your hair doesn't smell.
Yes, that's a marketing strategy. There's an aerosol there. It doesn't heat up to 800 degrees. There are fewer carcinogens and a better filtration system. They sold everything and it's targeting young people again. It's a technical device. Customize it for yourself, adjust the amount of vapor, choose the flavor. Here's a contest for who can blow the funniest clouds. Here's a sponsor for something. Here's a youth opinion leader. He has it right out in the open. He deliberately vapes it on camera, telling everyone how cool it is. This is a very powerful marketing strategy. Attractive points of sale, young, good-looking salespeople. Do you smoke? Did you know it's harmful? But vaping is less harmful. Let's give it a try. Which flavor do you like?
That's a serious
Strategy. Inhaling. Very well thought out.
Teenagers all over the world have really gotten into vaping. In only 4 years, vape and e-cigarette sales in Russia have risen 9-fold, along with rising sales. Doctors have started recording more and more cases of hospitalizations with severe lung damage, and new diseases have appeared that medicine didn't know before. One of these diseases is e-cigarette or vaping product use-associated lung injury, or e-cigarette or vaping product use-associated lung injury. It's an acute lung injury associated with the use of vapes. Not cigarettes, but electronic vapes and e-cigarettes. Igor, here's severe inflammation. This led to part of the lung tissue in the human respiratory system being excluded from the act of breathing, meaning gas exchange in a large volume of the lungs is disrupted and respiratory failure occurs. 5 years ago, this disease broke out in the United States, hospitalizing nearly 3,000 people and killing 68, and many of them were young guys. Another danger is the so-called popcorn lung or obliterative bronchiolitis. This is a chronic disease in which the small airways in the lungs become inflamed and scarred. That means you lose part of your respiratory tree, and this process is irreversible. You can't reverse it and get your lung back. The main cause of this disease is the chemical diacetyl, which is often added to flavorings for vapes. Unlike e-cigarettes or vaping product use-associated lung injury popcorn, lung develops very slowly. And there are no exact mortality statistics specifically from it yet. In the last 5 years, severe fatal cases among teenage vapers have also been recorded in Russia. In 2021, a schoolboy in Moscow was hospitalized in serious condition with acute respiratory failure. Doctors said he had e-cigarette or vaping product use-associated lung injury. He had been vaping actively for 6 weeks before being hospitalized. In 2023, a 9th grade girl in the Moscow region died after smoking an electronic cigarette.
This is a special kind of smoking. First of all, it's dangerous for young people, but these aren't cigarettes, so that means they're harmless. So that means you can smoke them. And you having all these teenage elements of growing up, right? I mean, why not smoke with your friends? It's so cool, isn't it? That's where the real danger lies, because of course there's nothing like that kind of pressure there. Well, it's not tobacco burning, and there's no smoke, but there is an aerosol that contains nicotine. We've already established that in any form it affects the vascular system, leads to cancer, creates issues for the immune system, and so on. So it's consistent, it also gets absorbed quickly, And secondly, it's absolutely unclear what the ratio is, for example, of sweeteners, flavorings, propylene glycol, and glycerin. Propylene glycol and glycerin are harmless by themselves as elements, but when they combine in this heating element, they undergo a chemical reaction. If it was just out in the open, let it react. But it reacts inside, and there you also get salts, heavy metals from the heating elements, and nicotine along with everything else I mentioned. And this chemical reaction gets in there and happens inside. Basically, God knows what goes on. Because the mixtures change, they're not standardized. These aren't pharmaceutical drugs. Take this many milligrams of this, take that, let's weigh it all out, let's do all of this, and that's it. For 14-year-olds, it works one way. For adults and women, it works differently. This is no longer medicine. This is fooling around, which seems harmless, but actually carries a very big potential threat. For the manifestation of a disease like Valley, for example, well, literally, this is a disease in the United States that has claimed lives. Over 2,000 young people were hospitalized there. It was simply that vitamin E acetate got into this mixture, and there was a cannabinoid component in it. Okay, they would say, yes, it's specifically related to these two elements, but who can guarantee that something else won't get in? Do you understand that this is a random event? This aerosol could contain countless random events. It caused the rapid deaths of young people. That never happened with tobacco. That is, in order to die from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, you need to smoke for 20 or 30 years. At some point, you might mature and decide not to smoke, which is good. But here, smoking just once or twice could land you in intensive care. Well, so to speak, you survived, thank God, or you didn't survive. That's the story.
In Russia, officials are now seriously discussing a total vape ban. The State Duma is considering fully prohibiting their sale. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Finance has drafted amendments to the law regulating tobacco and nicotine product trade licenses. If they are adopted, regional authorities will have the right to independently ban the sale of vapes and liquids for them in their regions. Tobacco heating systems like IQOS are legally treated like regular cigarettes, so banning their sale is not being considered. At the moment, the impact of vapes on the body, especially on the bodies of teenagers, has not been fully studied. And that's exactly what all these tobacco companies are taking advantage of, because e-cigarettes and vapes appeared on the market relatively recently, only 15-20 years ago. For diseases like cancer and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, that's too short a period of time. They develop over decades, and scientists honestly admit that the long-term effects are still being studied. And this immediacy creates a ground for manipulation of teenagers. Major tobacco companies, faced with declining cigarette sales, release vapes. Their strategy includes funding research that favorably highlights electronic cigarettes compared to traditional ones. Such studies are often based on the principle of the lesser of two evils. They compare the levels of specific carcinogens and toxins in vapor and smoke, and indeed, they fairly show that in many cases, vapor is less harmful. That's what is emphasized. As a result, a double study emerges. The tobacco industry and lobbyists promote the idea of vapes as a harm reduction tool for heavy smokers, diverting attention away from the youth. Independent scientists and health organizations such as World Health Organization, for example, the World Health Organization, are raising the alarm because the industry has managed to create a new generation of nicotine addicts.
Any means of nicotine delivery, today, electronic delivery devices are not harmless. They are all harmful. We still need to answer a very important question about the long-term effects. That is, several generations of reckless smokers need to pass, they need to be counted, and they need to be divided into comparison groups. This is a very big job. Who died from this, who died from that, who didn't die from this, and how each person died. Girls, boys, this one started smoking at 12, he died like this from that. These are routine things. They require time to answer this question, and that's what everyone always latches on to. Young people often tell me during appointments, there's no evidence, right? Well, yes. But there is evidence that everything that goes into it is harmful. Also,
another hidden and therefore especially insidious danger for school children is snus, chewing tobacco in small packets. It's not smoked, but placed behind the lip, which makes it seem harmless. But that's a deceptive impression. Snus is rapidly gaining popularity among teenagers, even among those who play sports. Studies in Russian schools show that every fourth high school student has already tried it. What is the reason for such widespread use? Naturally, as in previous examples, it's the myth of safety. Most students sincerely believe that snus is a harmless alternative to cigarettes, and many are completely indifferent to it, while they feel dislike toward regular smokers. Reality, in fact, it's much harsher. A single portion of snus can contain dozens of times more nicotine than even the strongest cigarette. A cigarette has about 1.5 milligrams, while snus has 22 milligrams. The harm to health is enormous and multifaceted. Snus mercilessly destroys the oral cavity. It causes inflammation and gum recession, which leads to the destruction of teeth and bone tissue. Its link to lip cancer development has been proven. Cancer can also appear on the cheek and gums. Nicotine affects the cardiovascular system. It sharply increases blood pressure and pulse. It puts an unbearable strain on a young body, and it increases the risk of heart attack in the future. The danger increases because snus can be used secretly, even in class. This illusion of safety and invisibility is the main advantage for school students who are looking for ways to try nicotine. It's important to remember that snus is not and has never been a harmless toy. It's a concentrated poison that causes rapid addiction and delivers a devastating blow to the entire body. The most surprising thing is that snus has been officially banned in our country for more than 10 years. So how is it that all of this continues to be sold? They rename it, alter the ingredients, exploit legal loopholes, and benefit from the slow lawmaking process, since passing new regulations takes time. But changing ingredients is much quicker. That's the whole paradox.
Senior comrades, there's always someone of age who brings things like snus pouches to school, buys a can for 200 rubles, sells at retail and profits. It's a racket that causes nicotine addiction. The schools were all spit covered. I remember that epidemic. We went to the State Duma. It was packed. It was convenient, no smoke or anything. You just put it under your lip and sit there enjoying it. Well, it's like how they advertise nicotine lozenges. Tobacco companies are monsters. They figured out to add ammonia for that nicotine hit. They hid cancer statistics for years and resisted everything until the end. Now there are workarounds. These bloodsuckers will never give up.
They will always deceive us for money, for profit. They will drag our children into it, just like before. Remember the colonists with blankets that were infected with smallpox? But now you and I understand that it was deception and manipulation, yet we still take poison into our own hands. There is no harmless way to smoke. It doesn't exist. It will never be invented. Stop grabbing this poison and switching from one to another to something prettier, more high-tech or tastier. That's not a solution, and it never will be. There's only one way. Stop poisoning yourself. Quit. Stop lying to yourself.